Right, I think we're on. Good morning to all of you COP26 participants, wherever you are, some on the venue itself, some of you from home. It's very good to have you. If you're here, you've landed at the virtual ocean pavilion at COP26. This is the first of its kind, allowing all of you to get a piece of the COP feeling if you're away and hear of the challenges and success just happening in the negotiation rooms and in the corridors. You may have attended the opening of the pavilion that just concluded a few minutes ago. I hereby salute all of the partners of the Virtual Ocean Pavilion, and it's good to have this initiative launched. In particular, thanks a lot to the Global Ocean Forum team for launching all of this and all of the partners. I see most of you here. Thank you. There's a great program at the Virtual Ocean Pavilion. If you haven't done so, please take some time to visit the booth, find all the goodies, and see for yourself what's happening in the great program on the pavilion. My name is Sylvie Goyer. I'm advisor to the Vice President at the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and I'll serve as the moderator and MC for this event. We have little time, and I have a great list of panelists and speakers, so I'll be very quick. This first session at the Virtual Ocean Pavilion focuses on ocean and finance, in particular blue economy for ocean health. So very timely as we start the COP26 negotiations, and we know that finance is going to be a key issue. For this first session, we'll first have a few high-level remarks from UNCDF and UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean. I'll introduce in a minute. The second session, we look at reef-positive finance, and in particular via the example of the Global Fund for Coral Reef. And again, a great lineup of speakers for that example. Then we'll go to two roundtable discussion, narrowing it down to blue finance and ocean finance. And again, we're hoping to give you insights into the subject, how ocean positive blue economy can help both address climate change and also protect the ecosystems. Without further ado, let me quickly move to Ambassador Peter Thomson from Fiji, UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean. I think no need to introduce Peter Thomson. He's a friend of the ocean, a champion of the ocean, a warrior of the ocean, and has much to say about it. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. Give me a thumbs up if I'm heard clearly there.
I'll shout.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, why we're here in Glasgow. For me personally, and I hope for most of us, it's because we believe in intergenerational justice. I actually tried to get the organizers to have lanyards where we identified ourselves as to who we were the parents of. In my case, my grandchildren helped me get this one together, which I'm wearing around the conference. And it says grandfather, I introduce myself as grandfather, Grace, Mirabelle, Poppy and Rose, kids' rights now. And on the back, after a big family consultation, there was the message, never give up. So hopefully in all of your events and negotiations and all your thinking at this COP26, you're thinking not about yourselves or any short-term victories. It's about what your children and grandchildren are going to be living. That's why we're here. And obviously we want security for them. The other reason that I'm here personally is to make sure that the ocean has its place at the top table. In the past, we've had to fight to get to that top table, whether it's biodiversity. How can you talk about biodiversity without talking about the ocean? Over 70%, 90% of life biodiversity is in the ocean. So same thing with a climate change meeting. How can you have a climate change meeting without talking about the ocean? The climate is basically the interaction of the atmosphere with the ocean. And as you know, we're doing terrible things to the ocean. The mantra is no healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And the ocean's health is measurably in decline. So that's why we are pushing the climate finance needle in the direction of the sustainable blue economy. I know I'm preaching the converted here, when I say the sustainable blue economy is our future, and whether that's medicine or energy or food, that's where our children and grandchildren to get that security from. But not if we keep pumping these greenhouse gas emissions out at the level we are, because that's acidifying, poisoning the ocean, and we can't guarantee their security that way. So that's why Glasgow is so important to the ocean's health. Look, very quickly, I know I've only got 4 minutes to say something to you, but when we say that we need a healthy ocean, you have to look at the situation of coral, because the IPCC's told us we're going to lose 70 to 90% of coral when we go through 1.5 degrees, tropical corals, that is. And we are perilously close to that during this decade. We're supposed to go through it. Meanwhile, WMO has told us we're heading towards 3 degrees within the life of our beloved grandchildren. We hit 3 degrees. So where does that leave us with coral? Look, I come from a coral island, and I obviously refuse that kind of future. One of the things I do believe is that we have to be working very vigorously with the 10 to 30% that IPCC says will still be there. And we're starting to identify where those resilient reefs are. We can learn from them and help the reefs that are more threatened by what we learn. But all that's going to take funding, because it's not just about science. It's about what you're doing to transform your industry and agriculture on land. It's whether you're prepared to invest in sewage schemes that are polluting coral reefs and so on. So there's a lot of money involved in this transition, but it's a transition we have to do because, as I said, there's no healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And can we have a healthy ocean without coral? Answer, we don't know, but common sense would say that no, it's like cutting off a leg or something, I suppose. So that's why it's also important. I'm glad to see that the climate finance needle is showing signs of moving in the direction of sustainable blue economy now. I want to thank the Green Climate Fund for that 125 million that they just announced for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. That's a step in the right direction. But we're talking about the need for billions of dollars for this coral work that we've got ahead of us. So folks, keep fighting for coral, because in the end, as I've often said, the future of humanity may be related in some way to the future of coral. And as we know, the future of coral is not looking that good at the moment. So all our good works are required now for the solutions, and we need the funding to put those solutions into place. Thanks for giving me the time to speak.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I love this badge and the never give up. We'll try and live up to that. Thanks for those good words and excellent remarks. We definitely look forward to seeing you in the corridors of COP26 with the badge and your wisdom and words. Gives me great pleasure now to introduce Preeti Sinha from UNCDF, Executive Secretary of United Nations Capital Development Fund. Preeti is in the middle of COP26. I see there's action behind you. We're delighted to have you on board. Please give us your remarks. We're delighted to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie, and I hope that's not too much background noise. Do let me know, but I'll really be very pleased to join Ambassador Thomson and all the panelists here in presenting to you the first hope of several other panelists, our Global Fund for Coral Reef, a joint partnership fund, a blended fund, an innovative finance example for investing in the oceans, particularly investing in the coral reefs. So Sylvie, with your permission and that of Chuck and other partners who might be present, let me be the first to say, following Ambassador Thomson's very enlightened comments, that we at the UN Capital Development Fund, along with other UN partners, UNDP, UNEP, MPTF, that is the Multi-Partner Trust Fund, we've come together to create now it is a $625 million blended fund for coral reefs. And I think that is a step in the right direction. A lot more needs to be done, but this is a wonderful, beautiful partnership between public capital, between private capital. And of course, we acknowledge Green Climate Fund recent investment into the investment window, sort of putting the foot forward that all of us multilateral structures are also looking at ways of innovating capital, making sure our capital leverages ODA, the ODA given to us is expanded many times by attracting great private partners who are on the call today, and I hope they will speak more about their role. But just as far as UN Capital Development Fund is concerned, a word in the fact that the UN had the foresight back in '66 to say, we want to fund for the least of the developed countries, for the SIDS, that's the small island developing states. And that's why the UN Capital Development Fund was founded. And within the UN system, given instruments like loans, guarantees, blended funds, bonds, which we are deploying now in full force. We are at a very pivotal stage. We are launching our strategic framework 2022-2025. For the next 4 years, we've announced biodiversity as a key area in that. So that is innovation. And imagine, wouldn't it be wonderful bringing biodiversity to the fore in the plans of the least of the developed countries and the plans, of course, of the small island nations. That's integral to their being. But certainly, we would like to see more being done, from these countries. So build new better instead of building back better. These economies are doing infrastructure right now. So having said that context, let me say we also feel that this is one of the first funds, blended funds on SDG 14, Life Below Water. So Ambassador Thomson, we're hopefully putting into action some of that objectives of that SDG. And we've commenced work in Fiji. We have almost a $50 million allocation into Fiji. Some wonderful programs there. Basically we target investable opportunities. And the two we are targeting are to do with the off-run of fertilizers into the water, to preventing that, so preventing bleaching of corals. And there's other ones about landfills, sanitation landfills, making sure they're treated better. So again, that the ocean is not the ultimate victim of that. So again, great programs happening. In the future, in the near future, we will look at Philippines, the Maldives, and a regional program with Belize, Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala. Besides that, the UN Capital Development Fund also focuses on something called LOCAL, and you'll see behind me, that's our LOCAL hub, that stands for Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility. It's a way in which UNCDF, we give performance-based grants to countries so that they come up with programs that can get climate funding for their adaptation and somewhat mitigation as well. So proud to be here and proud to bring LOCAL to the SIDS as well. So we've started working in, we have a program out for Jamaica that we hope to get approved. And we have other ones in Tuvalu Island. It's one of our countries of focus. So just to make sure that we bring to you financing instruments that can really help SDG 14. And again, proud to say the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, the motto is protect, transform, restore, recover. And I know we all feel very deeply about that. And I'm sure I join all the panelists here in sending my heartfelt sentiments on that protection, on that recovery. And with that, Sylvie, maybe let me conclude my comments and hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary, for those great words with the motto and mantra from Executive Secretary and Ambassador Peter Thomson. I think we're in good hands. And you've both highlighted the Global Fund for Coral Reef, particular positioning to really reach out to ocean and climate. So it's a great transition to the first panel. Again, thank you very much to both of you for the great remarks to start this session. We're now moving to the first panel session, focusing on the Global Fund for Coral Reef, which both Ambassador Thomson and Executive Secretary Sinha have highlighted. Let me remind, the Global Fund for Coral Reef was launched a bit over a year ago at UNGA 75 in September 2020, so just not too long ago. It's made great progress already in 1 year, and it's a coalition which I'm happy to be part of both philanthropies, UN agencies, private investors, and a whole lot of local partners and action-oriented organizations. So I'm very pleased to have around the table today, for illustration of the Global Fund for Coral Reef, Chuck Cooper, the Managing Director of Policy and Government Relations at Vulcan, representing the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, chairing the executive board of the GFCR. Chuck, good to have you with us. We're having Craig Cogut, Chairman, CEO, Founder of Capital Advisors. And Craig has just successfully, as we just heard, negotiated the GCF grant for the investment window. Greg, very good to have you with us. We also have Hudson. Andrew is the head of Water and Ocean Governance Program at United Nations Development Program. Andrew and UNDP are key partners in GFCR. Andrew, good to have you with us. And finally, Melanie McField, the Director of Healthy Reefs Initiative. We'll be happy to have you tell us about what you're doing on the field. Let me start with Chuck as the chair of the executive board of the GFCR. Chuck, can you tell us why and how did the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation initiate this fund?
Well, thanks so much, Sylvia. It's great to be here. Our founder, Paul Allen, who is the co-founder of Microsoft, was an avid diver. He was passionate about the ocean, and Paul witnessed the decline of coral reefs firsthand, and he wanted to act. We knew that coral reefs were experiencing the greatest extinction risk of any ecosystem due to climate change and other human pressures, including pollution, overfishing, and coastal development. We also knew that coral reefs are immensely important to 1/4 of all marine life and to the 1 billion people who rely on them for their food, livelihoods, and coastal protection. So it was clear that there was a coral reef crisis and that the stakes for people and the planet were incredibly high. At that point, the unanswered question was, why is the global response not commensurate with the threat? Well, we researched this question too, and we found that not only was there a coral reef crisis, but there was a huge coral reef funding gap. One number really jumped out. At that time, only 1/100% of climate finance was going to coral reefs, despite a high-level panel's assessment that, quote, climate change adaptation funds will be a key target for enhancing coral reef resilience and enabling social adaptation over the long term. Once these problems had been identified, the solution came into focus: launch a blended finance mechanism, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, that would allow governments and philanthropy to work together to catalyze private investment and climate finance to address the coral reef crisis and the coral reef funding gap. So that was our motivation. And the first thing we did was reach out to our partners and hold a workshop in Monaco that the government of Monaco and the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation helped to organize. We brought in some of the world's leading conservation finance experts, and we asked these questions of them, and the answer came back that yes, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs was very much needed. And so we're pleased to be part of this amazing coalition that's moving this forward.
Great, thanks a lot, Chuck. It's amazing how getting your head underwater gets you to see things differently, yeah? And I understand that it's been one of the prime motivator for Paul G. Allen to take consideration of coral reefs. And this is, again, an education issue. Thanks a lot, Chuck. Would you mind telling us, just as a second question, how do you see the GFCR really bring up to scale action on the ground for coral reef?
Thanks, Sylvie. Well, the reality is that grants from governments and philanthropy are critically important, but governmental and philanthropic funding can only provide a fraction of the resources that are needed to address coral reef decline. We also need significant private investment. Our goal is for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs to serve as a demonstration fund. We want to collectively pool our resources to show which new large-scale solutions can achieve both our conservation and investment objectives. Over time, we'll be providing blended finance solutions that have proven track records, thereby building the confidence and trust of governments, investors, entrepreneurs, and local communities to invest in and scale these approaches. Scaling and leverage are really critical components of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. We also want to move from a project-by-project approach to a programmatic or portfolio approach that's driven by a smart, evidence-based global strategy. And in closing, I'd just like to say that the climate and biodiversity crises, as Peter said, are interconnected, and coral reefs are at the nexus of these crises. coral reefs are truly at the front line of climate change. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is an important mechanism, we believe, to mobilize resources for the implementation of both nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and actions to achieve the global goals for nature under the Convention on Biological Diversity. You know, despite the dire predictions, if we act with urgency over the next decade and we mobilize the necessary resources to implement proven approaches, we can change the trajectory of the coral reef crisis. We're asking everyone to join us, whether as a donor, a co-funder, an implementing partner, a thought leader, an advocate. It's not too late, but we must act now and we must act with urgency. Thanks, Sylvie.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for the great words. I'd like to amplify the call again to all of you. It's not too late. We must not give up. Coral reef are indeed at the center of the nexus and exemplify the crisis on climate and biodiversity. So thank you for taking us to the Global Fund for Coral Reef, and a good transition and emphasizing the need for investment and bridging between private and public investment. That gets me to you, Craig, as the CEO and funder of Pegasus Capital Advisor. Thanks for being with us. Craig, would you mind, as the investment window manager and building on what Chuck just told us, why you believe that the Global Fund, the Global Fund for Coral Reef model can really break the silos between public and private funding? Why are we talking that blended finance? Can you tell us about it?
Sure, Sylvie, it's my pleasure, and it's really an honor to be part of this group that was convened with between the Prince Albert, between Vulcan, and obviously the UN folks in launching this. I mean, the need is clear. The urgency, just to reiterate, is so clear. And SDG 14 is way underfunded, as we've said, and particularly coral reefs. At the same time, science exists, as Preeti said. There is lots of innovation on all different sectors, many which are land-based, which can be applied. So the key really is finance. We need to close the financing gap, and we're not too late. And I think what we're talking about here is, and I'll describe the model in some detail, is creating a demonstration project, as Chuck said, where we can show what can be done in one place, maybe in multiple geographies, and at the same time mobilize different sources of capital. Some cases public, some cases private, some cases having them work together, some cases philanthropic capital to put to work now. And we already have a very rich pipeline of projects. The Global Fund is basically set up as a $625 million commitment of $125 million in a grant window, which is meant to basically provide technical assistance grants and other earlier stage commitments on a nonprofit basis to help develop projects we can invest in, to take out the risk for private investors, to facilitate and nurture the science, the technology, the on-ground restrictions that will need to be overcome, regulatory issues, and then bring them to the investment side, which we manage at Pegasus. That's a $500 million. So the first element of blending is that. We are de-risking what will ultimately become investable projects for investors. And then there is a $500 million investment window, as we've said, which we manage, and that itself has two tiers. The Green Climate Fund, and I'll talk a little about them in a second, is committing a junior tranche of capital, $125 million, which is basically junior in terms both of getting senior investors their capital back, plus also junior in return. So it's really meant to, on multiple levels, help improve returns to push private investors. We need to get private investors to start putting money in. And this multiple blended finance model does that. And I should say also, $625 million is not what we intend to apply, even in this first binary fund, as Chuck said. There will be a leveraging factor of bringing in co-investment at multiple levels and also bringing debt in projects. So what we intend to mobilize is a multiple of that. The Green Climate Fund, and we'll show you a video in a second and as Ambassador Thomson said, they've really stepped up here, is focused on innovation. And this is such a pioneering, and again, to Chuck and you and UNDP and colleagues, this is such a pioneering effort, and Green Climate Fund recognized that, has stood behind it, and is our anchor investor again on a junior basis. And a big part of what their focus is on helping SIDS, is on bringing innovation, new models that can be scaled and replicated. And maybe with that, we should just share a video that they offered us to present.
Great, thank you, Craig. I think the video is running right now.
The Global Fund for Coral Reefs aims to alleviate the adverse impacts of local threats which are prevalent these days, which include plastic pollution, sewage waste, and unsustainable tourism and unsustainable fishing. This project is extremely exciting because it represents the first initiative of its kind in the world, with multiple parties coming together representing a unique public-private partnership model, with grant assistance being provided to develop early stage ideas, with technical assistance and policy support being provided through the grant window, whereas the barriers that private sector investors face being addressed through the investment window through a tailored approach that the GCF is taking to this investment.
So if I might just add on, and they obviously, you saw some scenes of where we can invest, whether it's fisheries, whether it's in mangrove, seaweed. We just had a fascinating session on with folks from California on seaweed and kelp, many of which were actually species that can be grown in tropical waters. The fishing, waste management, there are models that do exist. And the key is to bring in pension funds. I mean, when we talk about what's not here, people talk about the oceans. I view my number one job here as we talked about educating through showing what can be done investment-wise. We need to get insurance companies. We need banks, pension funds, other private wealthy families to invest, and hopefully with this structure we'll attract some. We are attracting them, but we need to amplify that dramatically. And by bringing in, I think, private enterprise, we can build long-term sustainable enterprises and expertise, which again, as Chuck said, can be scaled. We need to generate and showcase that this represents a long-term benefit for local economies, local communities, particularly as we help people rebuild from COVID. And many of the countries we're working in obviously have been the hardest hit. So like Chuck, I am optimistic. It's not too late, but we really do need to get going. So we ask for your support. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Craig. That was very clear, and thanks for the call. We'll probably come back to you. We have interesting questions in the chat, but I'd like to first give a chance to the other panelists to give their side of the story as well. Andrew, we're very happy to have you on this panel. Andrew Hudson from UNDP, again, Head of Water and Ocean Governance Program at UNDP. Andrew, thanks for joining. I mean, resources for coral reef conservation have fallen very short for decades. How do you see the GFCR address this massive funding gap?
Yes, thank you, Sylvie, and greetings to everyone. As we've learned today, the GFCR is the UN's first global fund for SDG 14 and the only global blended finance instrument that's dedicated and devoted to coral reefs. With its focus on leveraging the combined power of public and private finance, the fund really represents, a now or never opportunity to pull reefs back from the brink of extinction. But as we've learned, the challenge is immense. There is indeed a massive coral reef funding gap. As you noted, support, if anything, for coral reef conservation has fallen well below what's needed in the recent decades. While in parallel, enormous amounts of investment continue to pour into activities that harm reefs and their related ecosystems, including continued investments in fossil fuels on the order of over $400 billion per year. On that note, I want to make a quick plug. If you haven't yet seen a wonderfully powerful and provocative message on that issue, please check out don'tchooseextinction.com. It's a UNDP initiative. It's very much worth seeing. I won't tell you more about it, but it's fantastic. So getting back, the GFCR is aiming to raise and invest, as we've heard, at least $625 million by 2030 through an innovative coalition of UN agencies, financial institutions, and philanthropy. In just 1 year since we launched it, the fund has begun to unlock game-changing investments that will protect and restore priority reef ecosystems in the face of accelerating climate impacts. As a blended finance vehicle, the GFCR is already inspiring the development of a really new investment ecosystem by providing a combination of grants, risk equity capital, debt, and concessional financing through its grant and investment windows. This will enable local communities and enterprises to implement reef-positive solutions at scale in priority coral ecosystems, in particular those that are already showing the most resilience to climate change.
Sorry, I was muted. Great, thanks a lot, Andrew. I know you've been a specialist of ocean issues for years, and if not decades, if I may say. So we really would like to get your insights into how you see such natural assets, just like coral reef. How can these natural assets be harnessed as successful business opportunities?
Well, Sylvie, natural capital assets, if they're effectively managed for resilience and sustainability, they can generate profit and support livelihoods for many generations. The million, or you could even say billion-dollar question is, how do we monetize ecosystem services while at the same time protecting and sustaining these assets, the fabric of life that underpin those services? So the idea of the GFCR is to invest in a diverse range of blue economy sectors that pertain to corals, from sustainable tourism, sustainable fisheries, ecosystem restoration, marine protected areas, and many others. In short, we want to invest in initiatives that direct financial flows from reef negative to reef positive, that help create market instruments that favor sustainable management of reefs, ensure corporate accountability towards reefs and dependent communities, and catalyze local reef-positive enterprises. As we've seen, in just 1 year since we've launched the fund, it's already achieving results. For example, in Fiji, where UNDP is a co-convening agent, we're helping to catalyze over $50 million in public and private sector funding towards coral reefs and local reef-positive enterprises. The Fiji program is going to establish a locally managed technical assistance facility to incubate a pipeline of reef-positive business models and institute special purpose entities with revenue streams to manage Fijian locally managed marine area networks. This joint program will also support a new initiative to source sugarcane plantations with a non-synthetic, non-industrial or organic fertilizer paired with educational programs to reduce agricultural runoff and erosion that are harmful to the downstream reefs. And then lastly, very exciting new GFCR programs are being established in more than 10 countries, including Papua New Guinea, Kenya, Tanzania, the Maldives, Bahamas, and others, that all have rich, valuable reef ecosystems that provide a source of food and livelihoods for millions of people. And so, for example, the fund is developing a blue economy regional program in the 4 countries of the Mesoamerican Reef, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and Belize. At over 1,000 kilometers long, that is the second largest reef system in the world after the Great Barrier Reef. And so this GFCR engagement has the potential to have broad-based positive impacts on a coral ecosystem that's home to over 900 species of marine biodiversity. And in a moment, you're going to see a video that describes some of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You're doing my job and doing a great transition to the video, to the MAR Fund. Can we have the video real quick? And then we'll hear from our MAR Fund partners.
The Mesoamerican Reef coastline stretches for over 1,000 linear kilometers from the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico to the Bay Islands and coastal Honduras through the Caribbean coasts of Belize and Guatemala. The MAR includes the largest barrier reef in the Atlantic and is an integral component of an interconnected and transboundary system of coastal habitats that includes mangroves, seagrasses, sandflats, and lagoons. This ecoregion is the heart of a rich cultural heritage that includes Mosquito, Garifuna, Caribbean Creole, Quechua, Mopan, Yucatec Maya, and Mestizo. As with most of the coral reefs of the world, the MAR is facing several very serious threats, such as climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, and overfishing. If no action is taken, the tourism, commercial fisheries, and coastal development sectors in the region could lose up to $3.1 billion a year by 2030. Conversely, a shift towards healthy reefs could unlock $2.5 billion annually across the three sectors. But there is reason for hope. Recent studies have found the MAR to have the highest live coral cover compared to other regions of the Caribbean, including some of the best populations of critically endangered acropora coral and other threatened structurally complex coral species.
MAR Positive Invest is a blended finance mechanism that will support conservation, protection, and restoration of coral reefs and associated ecosystems through the development and financing of commercially viable projects that deliver coral reef positive outcomes through a mix of philanthropic, private, and government capital. The Mesoamerican Reef Fund, or MAR Fund, is a regional private environmental fund that operates as a planning and coordination mechanism. We drive regional funding and partnerships for the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the MAR. Foundations of MAR Positive Invest are to grow a pre-existing emergency fund and increase the financial sustainability of protected areas and reef-dependent communities.
New Ventures is a pioneer and leader in building the Latin American ecosystem for impact investing. We have created financial products that serve the business in the missing middle and underserved markets and communities. For us, MAR Invest represents an opportunity to serve coral conservation, a sector that has received very little attention from the investment community.
The Healthy Reefs for Healthy People initiative includes over 70 organizations dedicated to safeguarding the Mesoamerican reef. We developed the first coral reef health evaluation framework with report cards and eco audits that evaluate both the ecosystem health and the country's progress in managing it through science-based recommendations.
With a network of 127 innovators, the MAR Leadership Program is the largest network of change makers in the region. As part of MAR Positive Invest, we will enable new cohorts of leaders for market-based solutions to conservation that will include investors, donors, public policy officers, and other groups, with the goal of increasing the likelihood of sustained innovation and financing in the MAR.
Thank you. You've seen her on the video. We now have her live on screen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce now Melanie McField from the Healthy Reefs Initiative, director of that initiative. Melanie, we're very thrilled that the Global Fund for Coral Reef is working with this coalition of partners in the MAR region, as was introduced earlier by Andrew. Could you please provide us some background to this initiative and how the MAR Fund potential role as a convening agent can really unlock this great partnership?
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. MAR Fund has been our financial mechanism in the region for 15 years now. You know, it was envisioned when we thought, you know, the big idea was kind of pulling together the 4 countries and being able to go after larger projects like GEF, major initiatives. We have KfW that has given, because we've come together, the 4 countries that, you know, the stewards of this reef, the 4 environmental funds of each of the countries got together and created the regional trust fund. So that was a great start, but now I think it's just perfect that we've rolled into this next level of how to engage with the private sector and incorporate the blended finance mechanism. You know, they originally worked on grants, and Healthy Reefs, you know, operates through grants through MAR Fund and also through the Smithsonian. And now we have the opportunity to have, you know, a new mechanism to be able to foster the private sector coming in and using the same relationships and structure of the MAR Fund that has worked so well for all of us. It's a known entity in the region. So I can tell you a little bit about the project. We want to hear, you know, we're just, we haven't yet submitted it. So we're about to submit our full proposal. And what it contains is it's a range of portfolio options. Like Fiji, we identified sugar as one of the threats. You know, this is a continental reef. So Central America and Mexico, you know, we have major agriculture. So one of the threats to the reef is the runoff from land of the nutrients from the fertilizers and pesticides. In Belize, there's sugar is operated by small farmers, and they have recently worked to get fair trade certification. So they were already very well organized and had taken some steps towards, you know, improving practices. And we're working with World Wildlife Fund in this one, and they will actually have a mechanism to incentivize them. So the more environmentally sustainable their practices become, they can get a lower rate on the loan mechanism. So that was it's a quick entry point because the work had already started with the fair trade. The second one that's also in partnership with World Wildlife Fund is with the aquaculture industry. So the shrimp aquaculture in Belize had worked to, a couple of the farms have already switched to this new technology that is a completely closed system. So what we're doing is like encouraging the rest of the whole industry, there's only like 9 farms, to adopt this technology, and then we will have zero effluent, which the runoff from this aquaculture is all down in the southern region. We have, you know, the major problem with our reefs in Mesoamerica is algal overgrowth, and that algae is fueled by nutrients to a large part. So we are trying to attack the nutrients from different ways. And wastewater treatment is also in our portfolio list. That will take a little longer to get implemented, but in the little tourist village of an island of Key Caulker, very close to the reef, no sewage treatment right now. And the private company that runs the water and sanitation in Belize is really interested in working with us, looking at some new technologies and things like that. So it provides a mechanism for us to have a conversation with these entities that we wouldn't, because we have the access to the funding that they need. So,
Great.
Yeah. We also have Blue Carbon, a project to do some MAR branding. We have a lot of mangroves in the area. And so if we can get this blue carbon, you know, it's an opportunity to get conservation, making sure that these mangroves aren't cut down, basically. And even if they're in protected areas or not, we can get benefits for the carbon that they are sequestering, because mangroves are so effective at that. We'll also be looking at MPA sustainability, doing some business concepts from about 20 of the MPAs to go through and look at how we might be missing opportunities to get sustainable financing, bringing business models into that. And finally, the last 2 projects are looking at restorative mariculture. So one is seaweed farming, that's been kind of a very low level going on for a couple decades in Belize, but it's never really been able to jump into the having a widespread application. So it's beneficial to the ocean because it's absorbing the carbon dioxide, it's absorbing the nutrients, and it's providing habitat and, you know, a food source and nice livelihoods. And we're targeting it for fishers, so it will be an alternative livelihood to overfishing. And then lastly, we have a new idea for coral reef restoration, restoring herbivory by growing the king crab, which is the largest herbivorous crab in the region. And we've been testing this for the last couple of years and working with a few more years. We think we'll have that system understood well enough to be able to have large application with many small scale fishers doing the rearing of this crab and placing it on the reef where it can actually graze down a lot of this macroalgae that is our main problem, and then it can harvest it. So that's the idea. That's kind of the big picture of the portfolio. It's a lot of different things. So I think it's, you know, it's quite balanced in terms of more traditional and very new technology.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Melanie. This is great example and illustration of the Global Fund for Coral Reef, tackling both local drivers of degradation, as you mentioned, some protection issues and blue carbon and marine protected areas, but also some blue economy models. And you've mentioned seaweed, something that Craig was interested in and just referred to earlier. So a lot of good illustration of what the Global Fund for Coral Reef would do, and in particular blue economy, which leads me to the second panel. Thank you, Melanie, for that. Before I do so, there's an interesting question in the chat, and I'd like all of you to give me a quick response, please. Bryce Bray here from UNEP. Question, is there a way to include small or individual impact investors in the GFCR? Some, you know, microfinance or some kind of donation on a revolving funding basis from people on the ground. Would you see that possible? If any one of you, maybe Craig or Andrew, Chuck, can give me some quick response. Or Preeti, of course.
Well, quickly from my side, we would love to do that. We run into some regulatory issues, which I don't think the grant window would have on the investment side. I think we may, but we would be happy to look into that. It would be if we can get a securities exemption. You know, there are all sorts of regulatory things. It's a wonderful thought. And again, I maybe turn it over to Chuck, Andrew, or Preeti if there's a way on that side. Just one thing I would like to emphasize, which is so clear from all this, we're listening to Andrew, Melanie, there's so many exciting places to invest here. So we're thrilled with that. And it really is due to the partnership. Going back to your first question, Sylvie, one of the, why is this going to work? It's going to work as the people. This extended network that everyone's convened, you, Chuck, UNDP, Preeti, and with the local aid folks like Mar. It's just incredibly exciting with everyone coming together. And so we should find a way to let smaller investors participate. But so Chuck, can we do that?
And thanks a lot for those elements of response, Craig, and positive feeling. Anyone would like to add something, Chuck?
I would just say that since the beginning, we've thought about, is there a way to attract investments from individuals, whether contributions through the grant window or investments. So I think it's a really good idea. I think we'll work with our UN partners to see if the UN Trust Fund, if our UN Trust Fund is able to do that from an administrative standpoint. But I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'd like to see us take a close look at it.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks for those elements of response. Bryce, I invite you to get back to us, and as you heard, very positive feedback. Thanks a lot. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for this great session, and moving on to the second one on really blue economy, and some of the speakers already mentioned some ideas. It gives me, thanks a lot again, it gives me great pleasure now to move and helping us really clarify what is the blue economy. What are we talking about here? And to respond to this question, I have again a great speakers on the panel, and I'd like to introduce them really quickly. I have Chip Cunliffe, and we referred to insurance earlier on. Well, Chip is the Director of Sustainable Development at AXA, the insurance company, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about this. Torsten, you're the founder of the Global Ocean Trust. Good to have you with us. We have Dorothée Herr, the Manager for Ocean and Climate Change, the Global Marine and Polar Program at IUCN. Dorothée, it's very good to see you again. I'm very pleased to have David Meyers as well, the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance. David, very good to have you. And finally, Miko Maekawa, Miko, Senior Research Fellow at the Ocean Policy Research Institute of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Miko, very good to see you and to have you. If I may, I'll start with you, Chip. We've mentioned quite a bit about insurance. Now, what role would you see the insurance playing in blue finance and in this mitigation, adaptation interventions for resource and nature-based solutions?
Great, look, thanks Sylvie very much indeed for inviting me to speak today. I think one of the major things for us is that there are trillions of dollars indeed of assets and infrastructure that can be found along coastlines around the world. 12 or 15 megacities are coastal. So as an insurer and indeed as an investor, we need to understand how the risk landscape will look in the future. And knowing that climate change will likely mean more extreme weather events and sea level rise. And you put those two things together, and you'll see coastal flooding and inundation and coastal erosion, etc. And so, the prediction is that annual costs will calculated at around $1 trillion to coastal areas every year. So the sums are large, but of course we need to be sort of focusing on, or maybe focusing beyond our own investments and insurance, because of course the impacts will be most acute for the SIDS and LDCs, as we've already heard, with women and girls being especially hard hit. And I think one of the things we all know, certainly within this group here as panelists, is that the ocean and its associated ecosystems have a real ability to mitigate and adapt to climate change as well. So we've heard about mangroves and the fact that they can sequester that carbon. They reduce costs from flooding to I think it's one of the numbers that Mike Beck has identified was $65 billion annually, and protecting 15 million people from flooding. Reefs do a similar job, and they've reduced annual flood damages from storms by $4 billion a year. And yet, as Craig mentioned, the amount of investment in the ocean and the ecosystem is certainly lagging behind. And so one of the roles that we as an insurer can play is really to help make the economic rationale to help to invest into the ocean space. So from our perspective at AXA, we look at this from investments, but also risk modeling and risk transfer standpoints as well. So as an investor, we are, within the private sector, we think and we know that, putting our money on the table will also help others come to the table as well. And, I know that, blended finance has been mentioned quite a few times in this panel already. And then from a risk side, integrating ecosystems into risk management frameworks and developing ecosystem insurance mechanisms are also going to help to move the dial forward. So, we're working with the Mar Fund and Willis Towers Watson as the to develop. And in fact, we've already taken the capacity, or provided the capacity for coral reef insurance along the Mar. We are developing a mangrove insurance product with the Nature Conservancy. And we're also looking to this week, actually end of the week, to launch the Coastal Risk Index, which for the first time will integrate coastal ecosystems into our risk models too. And so, I think the insurance sector and insurance itself has a really key part to play really in providing the safety net for the private sector to invest in the longer term. But of course, we can't do this alone. We have to do so in collaboration, as again has already been mentioned. And that's the reason that the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance was formed, and which I co-chair, and that's to drive $500 million into the space by 2030, making 250 million more people resilient to ocean-related risks. And it's also the reason that we are backing this Back Blue commitment for ocean finance. And AXA is certainly one of the first signatories to that, again around driving and ensuring the private sector integrates the ocean into our decision making. And I think maybe sort of my final point is that we need to be working hard to integrate nature-based solutions into every agenda. So not just at the top levels, but also from schools to town planners to architects and risk managers and politicians and indeed everybody in between. Because if we don't do so at all those different levels, then we're going to be certainly behind the dial. And I think that we can talk a good game, but we need to have this implemented at every level as well. So we at AXA and AXA XL more specifically, certainly proud to be leading in this agenda. And we know we have to do more, but that sort of really helps to drive us on. Sylvie, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Chip, and thanks. We rely on the insurance sector to be with us. Thanks for being with us today. I know we have little time. I've probably haven't been good enough to keep track of time. Let me move quickly to Torsten. Torsten is the founder of the Global Ocean Trust. You're an expert as well on ocean finance. What do you see as the trends for funding ocean action?
Thank you very much, Sylvie, and hello to everyone. I was delighted to co-author the finance section of the roadmap for ocean climate action that was launched today, and it shows that we still have a large gap between ocean climate funding needs and the finance made available to date. Even increased public funding will not be sufficient, so we need private finance. And to do so, we need to show that they're investable projects and appropriate finance mechanisms. So significant progress has been made since Paris COP21 in identifying these opportunities. This started with clarifying how key the ocean is to climate solutions, how ongoing ocean degradation worsens climate outcomes, and how therefore measures that reduce negative impacts on ocean and create opportunity in the marine coastal space are effective as climate solutions. But we at the same time needed to be sure that the efforts would also address the vast biodiversity and resilience challenges that we felt. So in sum, we needed measurable benefits for nature and people, in particular, local communities most affected. So we had to work out a solid impact framework, adequate principles such as the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, and test this proposition through pilots. And the IUCN Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility is a good example for this type of work. Now we have a clear investment proposition into ocean solutions. Thanks to the work of the Ocean Panel and many others, we have an understanding how significant that role is for climate contribution. And blue natural capital is an emerging asset class that will help us scale up this sort of financing by designing larger investment structures, working with the impact investor pioneers and bringing in now the more traditional investors. So the emphasis is now on implementation with increased blended finance structures to address challenging risk return profiles, using the capacities of multilateral development banks, complementing this with grant facilities to initiate blue infrastructure finance opportunities, integrating nature-based solutions, and bringing together innovative local startups and private sector engagements. So we're promoting new capital markets products as well, blue bonds, ocean investment products. But for strategies like this to succeed, we do need government engagement. So reduction of destructive subsidies, adequate ocean governance, including for the high seas, and strong engagement of development finance institutions. And one idea would be to actually bring on a new ocean sustainability bank as a focused ocean climate finance institution, so that we can move with the private sector from the millions of today to the billions that are needed here. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Torsten, for the succinct words. That gives me a good transition to Dorothée. We've been talking about nature-based solutions, and I know that's your pet subject as well. We've been referring to the Global Fund for Coral Reef for nature-based solutions. Can you tell us, do you see other opportunities for upscaling such nature-based solution efforts? Thanks, Dorothée.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvie. And yeah, I'm glad to hear the term nature-based solutions popping up now a little bit more as we go through the conversation. Indeed, with IUCN, we are running the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, and we are really looking for these projects that I don't have to repeat sort of with the business model, the revenue streams that we've heard about. But it's key for us that they have indeed an impact on conservation and or restoration. So the idea is to come up with solutions supporting business models that have a direct measurable impact. So in a sense, for us, pollution or waste management might not be our target per se, unless they really can show how this features within an MPA management action. So for us, we look indeed at projects like aquaculture, tourism, MPAs, carbon, of course, but again, how do they sit and really impact a managed area or whatever the sort of conservation management system there is. So I want to just give a big shout out to the project developers that we've been working out for the last 3 years. We just published their impact reports today on what they achieved. We had smaller and medium type grants, and we talk a lot about de-risking vis-a-vis the private sector. But again, I want to highlight that a lot of these project developers are taking on risk themselves, specifically those that are taking the leap from a more NGO-y conservation background, going into sort of these social enterprises and so forth. And it's been remarkable how they have been doing despite also the COVID challenges. So again, for those who want to look at how these business model work, where the revenue streams come from, we did a set of blueprints that are also available on our website, bluenaturalcapital.org. But then I think in terms of upscaling, I think what we want to try achieve in the long run, and I agree with you, it's not the project by project basis, but really getting to a larger scale in terms of infrastructure investment. So where NBS, nature-based solution, is not an afterthought, it's not sort of a corporate social responsibility effort, but it's really part of the design from the get-go. And there we do see quite some exciting efforts, whether it is more sort of through the impact investment world, and also here working with Pegasus Capital on the Subnational Climate Fund, where we try to integrate nature-based solutions and climate resilient infrastructure, or where we see also in the world of the multilateral development banks that really trying to take on the design of nature-based solutions from the start.
Great, thank you. Please put all this reference in the chat, and Miriam, I rely on you to make sure that all this interesting mention and reports are clearly documented in the record of this meeting. Thanks a lot, Dorothée, and we're very pleased to have IUCN as an institutional partner to the GFCR. Thank you, and great to have you. Let me turn quickly to David Meyers. I mean, we've just heard about the MAR Fund as one of the convening agent in the Caribbean. David, you've been, as the executive director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, you've been championing and supporting conservation trust funds over the years. Can you tell us a bit more about those conservation trust funds, and why are these institutions so important for ocean finance?
Well, thanks, Sylvia, and thanks for inviting me onto this panel. And the Conservation Finance has been honored to be supporting the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, developing the investment plan as well. And so, I mean, we look at a whole range of conservation finance mechanisms and try to see how we can leverage finance and economics in a way to achieve conservation outcomes. And just as the one example of conservation trust funds that are just amazing institutions that are generally regionally or nationally based, that have a goal of conservation for maybe protected areas or some other aspect, and or of conservation. And they have this amazing ability to take global flows of financing from large donors and large sources and translate them and get them to local organizations that are active on the ground, achieving concrete outcomes. And they have this knowledge of what's happening on the ground that's amazing. And so, you know, in a way, they're small conservation finance entities themselves. Of course, some of them have endowments, so they have sustainable financial flows. They become key institutions and organizations for having a seat at the table with government. And you know, I just want to maybe just bring together some ideas that I've heard before from a lot of the other panelists, that you know, how important, you know, government is for one here in creating opportunities for private investment in nature conservation here, and especially in coral reefs. In that, you know, a lot of the economic values of ecosystem services in nature were alluded to before. Chip mentioned, you know, protection from storms and flooding, but it's really hard to translate economic value of nature into financial revenue flows. And so this is one of the really great opportunities we have in front of us here. And there's really some really amazing innovations that are going on in this space. And it's great to see all the activities of IUCN and others, but you know, that the government really does come and play a key role in translating those economic values into revenue streams by putting in place a level playing field, by reducing the subsidies people mentioned before, and by you know, encouraging more sustainable behavior. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll just stop there.
Thanks a lot, David, for your consideration. With your succinct words, I know that our participants will turn back to you if they want to know more about conservation trust funds and what the CFA is doing. Thank you. Yeah, it gives me, you've mentioned how governments can help really in creating the enabling conditions. And that gets me to Miko. I understand your organization has just conducted a study to track international aid projects for ocean conservation and climate action. And thanks for putting that on screen. Miko, as a research fellow at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, can you tell us the level of public financing of ocean conservation and climate action in low and medium level income states? And you have just a couple of minutes, Miko, I'm sorry. Thank you for that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's my great honor to be part of this discussion. Ocean Policy Research Institute of Sasakawa Peace Foundation conducted a study to track international aid projects for ocean conservation and climate action. So I would like to talk about this study, and I'm trying to move to my next slide. Yes. So the purpose of the study was to track public financing of ocean conservation and climate action in lower and lower middle income states. We looked at the financial flow from 8 international institutions, including multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank, regional banks, and global climate funds, such as Global Environment Facility and Green Climate Fund. We looked at projects approved between 2013 and 2019, and here are the results. On the left, we can see clearly that the number of projects has been increasing at a steady pace each year. And on the right-hand side, it illustrates the level of cumulative finance for ocean-related activities, and we can also see the steady growth in financing. However, this analysis reveals that multilateral institutions provided only just under 3% of their total funding, at the level of $3.5 billion over the recent 5 years. This map indicates the grants provided around the world, and you can see that the South Asia has received relatively large amount of funding at the level of over $60 million between 2013 and 2019. So in conclusion, the world has seen a steady increase in investment in ocean and climate actions. However, as I mentioned, it is just under 3% and at the level of $3.5 billion over the years that we studied. And it also, we also found out that since countries have received relatively small amount of aid for the number of projects being implemented. And also by sector, the funds are still not translated into projects for some issues such as protected area management, pollution reduction, and so on. So here are the recommended actions that we would like to put forward. First, I think it is important to examine the need for financing to achieve SDG 14 and identify actual gaps. I think it is also very important to direct significant portion of the international aids to coastal and SID communities. Also, I think it is very important to raise awareness of investing in ocean and marine sectors, particularly in countries with a lack of financial resources. And lastly, as the next step, it is essential to develop bankable project models to really indicate models for the development of these projects. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Miko. And that gives me the opportunity to thank all of the panelists for the insights and great comments. Miko, please put reference to this important and significant work in the chat. It'd be useful to all of our participants. Without further ado, let me again thank all of you for being here and all of the participants. And please, I'm very pleased to introduce as a final, for closing remarks, as a final speaker, Ms. Briony Coulson, the head of Ocean Plastic Pollution and International Blue Finance at DEFRA, UK. UK is one of the partners in the Global Fund for Coral Reef. Briony, we're very happy to have you to close and provide those last remarks to this session. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to close what is a fascinating and invaluable session at COP26. It's been an absolute honour to be part of this panel with so many distinguished members who have spoken before me, and I feel really inspired by the work that we're all doing to protect the ocean. I was particularly moved by Ambassador Thompson's lanyard right at the beginning. It's a real reminder that we cannot give up and we need to take ambitious action for future generations. We've heard lots of information on the panel around the need for investment in coral reefs and what coral reefs provide to small island developing states, coastal communities, protection against and adaptation against climate change. But just to reiterate and bring together some of those kind of figures and the evidence, and just to remind ourselves as we close this session of why we need to continue doing what we're doing. So we know that more than 1 billion people benefit directly from coral reef resources for food, as well as source of income through fishing and tourism activities. Coastal communities and small island developing states in particular are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. Small island developing states particularly rely on healthy coral reefs for their related ecosystems to support and sustain livelihoods, which depend on food, the tourism industry, coastal defence that coral reefs provide. And this is why the UK is absolutely committed to supporting small island developing states and coastal communities by being a leading partner in addressing climate economic vulnerability by 2025. Coral reefs are home to 1/4 of the world's marine species and support countless coastal communities. But the ocean and seas do not abide by national boundaries, which is why we all need to work together globally to protect these important habitats. Investment in coral reef protection has not been adequate or proportionate to the economic value that coral reefs provide or to the risks that they currently face. The high-level panel estimates that the global investment required for coral reef protection is approximately 7 times greater than current funding levels. It's clear that the future of coral reefs hang in the balance. And there is a really important role for public funding. Public funding can address and enhance investor confidence and therefore unlock or de-risk private finance, which the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is addressing through its blended finance model. Earlier this year, at the G7 Leaders Summit, my Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, launched the UK's £500 million Blue Planet Fund to support developing countries to protect the marine environment and reduce poverty. The Blue Planet Fund focuses on protecting nature and tackling climate change in an integrated way. We will deliver through programs that strengthen and improve ocean governance, support and communicate locally relevant science, and engage with the private sector and local communities, among others. Through the Blue Planet Fund, we are immensely proud to support the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and the enabling environment that it provides, which will be essential for developing an investment pipeline and encouraging public and private investment that protects and restores vital coral reefs. The Green Climate Fund's 125 million contribution marks a turning point for financing coral reef conservation. This commitment will help accelerate action for the protection and restoration of marine ecosystems, which is being championed under the COP26 Nature Campaign, as well as supporting the COP26 goal to mobilize finance, both public and private finance, to support those on the front line of the climate crisis and reach global net zero by the mid-century. And on that note, thank you ever so much again for having me on the panel. Thanks so much to all the panelists. It's been immensely inspiring. What a way to start COP26, really highlighting the importance of coral reefs and ocean action. Back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Briony, and we surely look forward to COP26 outcome incorporating some elements of ocean, and we look to your championship from the UK on ocean and climate. Thank you very much for being with us. That concludes our session. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for their good words and outstanding insights. Participants, wherever you are, thank you for being with us. Special thanks to Nicole from the GFCR for organizing all of this, and Miriam at the Global Ocean Forum for the virtual Ocean Pavilion. Please turn on your video if you're still on, and Nicole, Miriam will take a quick picture. That concludes it, and I wish you all a great COP and hope to see you very soon. Please look for more events of the GFCR. Go to the GFCR website, more events on the Virtual Ocean Pavilion, lots of things happening there. And thanks again to all of you for being with us. Bye for now.